Hey, Frog fans, welcome into another episode of Indy Drill. I'm your host, Jamie Plunkett. Happy to be back on this lovely week of September 15th, breaking down the latest and greatest across the college athletics landscape. Hey, if you haven't heard an Indy Drill yet, it's just me, no Melissa Treebwasser. She will be back later this week with her From the Other Sideline preview of the battle for the Iron Skillet. She's got a fantastic guest lined up to help us preview TCU versus SMU one final time, and that will be in your feed and on the YouTube channels in the next day or so once that's all recorded and ready to rock. So this episode is just an Indy Drill. It's just me, Jamie, here talking to you, taking a wide angle lens on some of the other things happening around college athletics outside of the TCU bubble. So thank you for being here. Really, truly do appreciate it. Excited to keep this series rolling. We've gotten a ton of really good feedback from folks on the way that we're doing this kind of structure in the shows this fall. Obviously, we still got the big show on Sundays. We've got this one that drops every Wednesday, and then Melissa's preview drops later in the week after that. So really good rhythm. Got a lot of excellent feedback. Super excited that y'all are receiving it well, because that's the whole point, right? This is part of the Frogs Insider podcast network, I guess. Just another show in the feed wherever you get your podcasts. If you search Frogs Insider, you're listening to this episode right now. We are part of the Dave Campbell's College Podcast Network as well. You can search Dave Campbell's wherever you get your podcasts and find that feed. It's got a podcast for every single D1 program in the state of Texas. That includes our show, but it doesn't include this version of the show, if that makes sense. There are no Indy Drills and no From the Other Sideline episodes in the Dave Campbell's podcast feed, just our Big Sunday show. And that's how that's going to stay, because if everybody did all of their shows every week in that feed, it would just never be organized in any kind of way. So the Big Sunday show is on the Dave Campbell's feed. We would really appreciate it if you subscribed to that feed and showed it some love. But we also would love for you to subscribe to the Frogs Insider feeds wherever you get your shows, so that you can listen to what you're listening to right now and Melissa's preview series as well. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel as well, because we've got a ton of great content over there. Obviously, all of the video versions of our podcasts are over there, but beyond that, we've got post-game interviews, we've got midweek interviews, we've got other episodes of different shows that we're working on, all these kinds of things that we're kind of testing out over on the YouTube channel. So make sure that you get over there and check it all out. Leave us a subscription. It's free. Just click that little subscribe button. Make sure you turn on notifications so that you see every time a new video posts, which is pretty much daily at this point with all the stuff we're doing. And yeah, let's have a great rest of the fall. TCU's 2-0. Couldn't ask for much more than that, can we? So very, very excited about all the stuff we've got going on over at the Frogs Insider channel, and excited that you are along for the ride. Okay, this episode, what are we getting into? A couple different things. We got Twitter questions. A couple really good Twitter questions that we're going to talk about this week. We've got a story out of the University of Tennessee about how students can get into football games. It's not as direct forward as you'd think. And I'm not sure it's a system that would work at TCU, frankly. The next thing we're going to talk about after that is the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. It has been thrust back into the main consciousness of college sports fans, and we're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about the antitrust implications that go along with it, why Cody Campbell wants to amend it, and some of the other stuff involving the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. Beyond that, we're going to break down a little bit about the ACC and its live look-in reviews that it's been doing this year on ESPN. It has been a resounding success. Everybody is raving about it. We're going to talk about what it is and why other leagues should adopt it sooner rather than later. And then we'll get into a couple week 4 picks. Not a ton of really good games this week, but we've got 4 that we're going to take a look at beyond the TCU and SMU game as well. So why don't we go ahead and just jump right in to some Twitter questions. Let's get after it. The first one comes from Mando Frog. Do you think after the reports of practice last week of the defense not up to par for the staff? Okay, let me start this over, Mondo. Do you think that after the reports of practice last week of the defense not being up to par, that they really pushed the one-on-one matchups to prove to the corners that they needed to step up in practice and have proof to back up the claim with film. I think what you're asking, is, were the coaches trying to send a message to the corners by leaving them on islands against Abilene Christian? And now they have game film to back up why they did that because they needed them to step up in practice? I don't think so. I'm just going to come right out and say no. I don't think that they would do that. I think that what we saw on Saturday against Abilene Christian was a defense that was not as high energy as it needed to be. And I think that compounded itself with the fact that Andy Avalos did not let a lot of secrets out in the scheme on Saturday. I don't think he was calling a lot of complex stuff. It wasn't very multiple. If you go back and watch the film, it was very basic, straightforward. And the guys weren't motivated. And I think that was really what happened. That's why Abilene Christian put up 450 yards of offense and scored 21 points. It's really that simple. I don't think there was any ulterior motive by the coaching staff to try and motivate the corners in the secondary in practice by having that on game film. I think it did, but I don't think that was the original intent of the game plan going into Saturday night. I just think it was a side of the football that was maybe looking a little ahead to the challenge of SMU, because that's a bigger challenge, no doubt about it. So no, I don't think that the coaches set up the corners to get game film to back up what they were seeing at practice. Because frankly, all of fall camp and all the practice that I've been to and seen, and we can talk to Jeremy about this as well. You can talk to Steven about this as well in post game on Saturday. The corners and the safeties have looked pretty damn good. They've played very good football in practice for the majority of fall camp against what we know is a very good room of wide receivers. So I don't know that this is necessarily a long-term issue that the coaching staff is trying to solve by setting their guys up to fail in game. What I do know, because what Sonny said after the post game, they didn't have their best week of practice. He thought it was a little flat. We know from Jeremy and the Frogcast episode that there was some hooting and hollering about the way the defense was playing, especially on Wednesday. The coaches were not happy with how the guys were getting about it. We know, based on the sideline of the game on Saturday, that there were some members of the football team that weren't very happy with how some of the corners were playing. Bud Clark was getting after some people. And I just think it was a bad day, and we can talk about whether that's going to be a trend. We don't know. We don't have enough data for that yet. But we can also maybe say, hey, it's not a bad thing that they had a bad day against Abilene Christian. Now, you got to make sure it doesn't happen again, but what if that bad day had showed up against Baylor? What if that bad day had shown up this upcoming week against SMU? Like, if this was just an instance of them realizing in the moment that, hey, we didn't prepare the way we needed to prepare and now we're paying for it, and they're going to rectify that moving forward, then thank God that lesson got learned against Abilene Christian and not against Houston in late November, right? So that's what that is. I don't think there's any. I don't think coaches went into this game thinking we're going to prove a point to our corners. I don't think that was the case at all. Mondo's got another question as well. He says, if Barnes' injury is more severe than anticipated, is it possible for him to redshirt or medical redshirt? Yeah, if he's banged up and he's not going to play again this year, he can medical redshirt. He hasn't crossed that threshold of 30% of the season played to not be eligible for a medical redshirt, but we're not anywhere remotely close to that with this injury. He was already in the sauna doing rehab, getting right on Tuesday. And they're going to check back in with him Thursday to see if he's going to be available on Saturday. This isn't from my understanding, a long-term thing that's going to keep him out for the rest of the season. Not by any stretch. Now, is it something that could linger and make life difficult for him? Maybe. And maybe that means he needs a week or two, but we don't have any reason to believe he would need anything like a medical redshirt at this point. Brian Banks asks, TCU wants 7 home games a year. It is getting rid of the skillet to ensure we have other home and homes with P4 teams. What, to you, would be the pros and cons of doing what Iowa State does and making our local rival our annual home and home and losing out on other P4 matchups? This is a great question, Brian. This is a fantastic question because when you boil it down, it doesn't just take Iowa State to make this commitment. It takes Iowa to make this commitment as well, right? You need both parties to really kind of commit. I wonder if there was concern, about. Well, let me back up. First thing that I think about this situation is that when the decision was made to not continue this rivalry, that option wasn't on the table because SMU wasn't a P4 team, right? That was a G5 opponent that was taking up a potential home game on those seasons where TCU was playing on the road. And when you do schedule home and homes with P4 teams, like we saw in 2024, there can be those years where your P4 matchups on the road and the SMU game is on the road. And that left TCU with 6 home games last year. Now, what if that had been a year where there were only 4 Big 12 home games on TCU's schedule? And you're talking about a five game slate at the Carter for a season. It's wholly unacceptable for the amount of money people are paying for season tickets these days. And so I think that when the decision was made, when the conversations were had about getting to 7 games and really committing to getting 7 home games every year, SMU wasn't a Power 4 team. So that option didn't really present itself in that moment. Now, could they circle back around and figure something out and make that the case? Yeah, I don't see why they couldn't. But you've also got to remember that TCU has home and homes and future P4 games already scheduled out through, like 2030, I believe. Let me double check. Because I know they've got a Duke home and home on the schedule, right? They're already giving up a home game in 2026 to go to Ireland. So, you're kind of out of luck there. Let's see, what other scheduling things do they have on the docket already? Let's see. In 2026, TCU has the North Carolina game, which was going to be a home game. It's now in Dublin, Ireland. They've also got a home game against Arkansas State. In 2027, Stanford makes their return for the home game that TCU went out there in 24, and they've got Sam Houston on the docket already. So they're your 2 FBS home games. And because 2025 is a 5-game Big 12 home schedule, that means 2027 is as well, which means TCU already has 7 home games on the docket in 2027. 2028, there might still be an opportunity because you've got a road game at Duke is the only non-conference game on the schedule right now for TCU. 2029, they've got 3, and they're all at home already. Southeastern Louisiana, Duke, and Texas State are all coming to the Carter in 2029. I think I said 2023. That's not right. 2029, Southeastern Louisiana, Duke, and Texas State are all already coming to the Carter. That's another season where the Big 12 has 5 home games coming to the Carter. So that's 8. So you get 7 games guaranteed at home already in 2027. You've got 8 games, home games guaranteed in 2029. And then you've got the Purdue return game in 2030 as the only non-conference game on the docket. And let's be very clear about this. That means that there's a P4 game on the schedule every year through 2030 right now. That's the next, 5 football seasons? And Sonny made it adamantly clear today. You can go watch his press conference today because he got asked about this rivalry and he got asked about the schedule and how it all works out. And he said completely straight up that it's not realistic to expect TCU to play 11 P4 games every single season because it's an imbalance in the way that scheduling happens. And what I mean by that is, and what he means by that is, if you look around college football right now, there are 135, 136 FBS teams. This season, there are only 2 that are playing 11 Power 4 opponents, TCU and Baylor. That's it. And the reason for that is because the current system and the current structure doesn't require you to play a hard schedule necessarily to get access to the things that TCU wants access to, specifically the college football playoff. Now, some of those rules are changing. This is, the strength of schedule is going to matter a little bit more. So that's why we've seen the SEC go to 9 games, which we talked about a couple episodes ago. That's why they're committed to continuing to have a P4 opponent in their non-conference every year, which again we talked about already on I think it was the second Indy Drill, maybe the first one that we did. So we're seeing this shift in strength of schedule mattering more. So could we see a path down the road to getting the SMU game back because you're looked upon favorably for scheduling a little bit more difficult games? Maybe. But the reality is right now is we don't know how that's all going to play out yet. And the current strategy is, TCU's got 9 guaranteed Power 4 games in conference every year. And through 2030, they've got a 10th in the non-conference. So that's kind of where the situation sits, I think, from TCU's perspective at this point. And I'll be honest with you. I've asked a couple folks about the possibility of bringing this game back at some point, and it's not on the table. It's not something that they're talking about at this point in time. Could that change? Of course it could. We're talking about new administrations at both universities, new athletic directors at both universities. Things can change. And as we've seen in college athletics, things can change pretty quickly. But I wouldn't hold my breath about TCU SMU coming back. But Brian, I think that's a great plan. I love that Iowa and Iowa State have made that commitment to each other because I think it's really good for the state of Iowa. But there are a lot of things about this rivalry that are a little bit different than that one. And TCU's approach to scheduling is one of the big hangups at this point. Throwback Frog, what's up, my dude? What's the worst city in the county? I think that's supposed to be country because Tarrant County only really has one big city. What's the worst city in the country and why is it Dallas? Okay, well, Throwback, you are asking this question to someone who is from Dallas, and I think you know that. And that's hurtful and that's rude. And there's nothing wrong inherently with Dallas. But I'll also say this. SMU isn't in Dallas. It's in University Park. It's next to Highland Park. It's not really Dallas, right? Not really. I grew up like 5 minutes from there. But I grew up in Dallas. SMU's not in Dallas. It's in University Park, and that's a big difference, okay? Okay? But yeah, Dallas kind of sucks. Fort Worth is way better, and I'm so glad that I live here now instead of there. Michael Wagner asks, state of the kicking game? Question mark. Kyle Lemmerman is injured. I've been told on good authority that it is a groin injury and that it's going to take a couple weeks for him to get back. We saw Nate McCashlin do a great job with all of the extra points he had to kick in that game against Abilene Christian. I watched him make a 52-yarder towards the south end zone in warm-ups against Abilene Christian. So he's got a good leg. We've seen it in fall camp. And I think he can be a capable kicker when given the opportunity. And guess what? He's got the opportunity. So we'll see how that pans out over the next week or so. But I think he's a capable kid. He's a capable kid. He can get it done. Colin Burns asks, is the 11 a.m. time slot yet another example of why we're canceling this series? That even the media companies don't care about this game. All right. I don't think time slot necessarily is a way that a TV company tells you that the game doesn't matter, if that makes sense. TCU SMU time slot doesn't matter as much as channel matters. Let's put it that way. So last year, the ACC took the TCU and SMU game and put it on the CW. This year, the ACC took the SMU and Baylor game and put it on the CW. They don't put a ton of SMU games on main channels unless those games are against Clemson, Florida State, Miami, right? TCU, meanwhile, typically gets on ESPN at the very least. this game this year is on ESPN2. I don't think the 11 o'clock time slot is the issue. I think the channel is the issue. And the reason I don't think the 11 o'clock time slot is the issue is because the Big Ten intentionally puts its best game at 11 o'clock every year. It's a great time slot. Every week we see big noon kickoff, and the Big Ten game at noon is typically the big noon kickoff game, right? There are a lot of good games that happen at noon pretty much every single year. Texas OU happens at noon every year. Sorry, 11 a.m. noon Eastern. You know what I mean? There are a lot of big games that happen at 11 a.m. in that time slot every year, right? A lot of times Michigan, Ohio State is in that time slot. They are not afraid to put big games at 11 a.m., but those games don't ever end up on FS1 or ESPN2 or the CW. So I think it says more about a game that it's on ESPN2 than that it's at 11 a.m. If that makes sense. Texanomics. Should we be concerned about the lack of Eric McAllister? Or do we think as teams start to focus on Jordan Dwyer, he will get going more? I think that's exactly right. I think that when you go back and you watch the North Carolina film, and a little bit of when you watch Abilene Christian, although not as much, North Carolina was rolling a safety over the top of him. He was doubled, essentially, for most of the night. And when North Carolina made that decision to commit those resources to stopping Eric McAllister, they left the door wide open for Jordan Dwyer. They left the door wide open for other guys to get their reps. DJ Rogers was another one. He had like 5 catches against North Carolina. Now against Abilene Christian, we saw Eric get more targets, right? He had 2 passes that could have been touchdowns that ended up as incompletions. One, defender was in good position, got his hand in there. I thought it should have still been a catch. 2, Eric just bobbled it. He bobbled the ball as he touched down on the end zone. He toe tapped the end zone, and he was still bobbling the ball when he stepped out of bounds. And if he makes those catches, we're talking about Eric McAllister having like 115 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns on the day. So I think I think it's a little bit of both. They're going to have to start paying attention to Dwyer. They're going to have to start paying attention to the tight end because, DJ Rogers has caught a touchdown. Chase Curtis has caught a touchdown. Lafayette Kiowa looked pretty good in the end of the game. On Saturday night, he was great in pass pro as well, by the way. Go look at his PFF grade. He had like the second highest pass blocking grade of any TCU player against Abilene Christian. You're going to get Kamorian Pimpton back at some point. You got Mason Peterson as well. There are so many weapons on this team that defenses are going to have to pick their poison. And they'll keep picking Eric McAllister until they don't think that's a winning strategy anymore. And when they don't and they switch, Eric McAllister is going to feast. He's absolutely going to feast. I'm excited for that. I can't wait for that to happen. That's going to be great. All right, let's take a little break, and then we're going to get into Tennessee and how it's tracking its students, ? Okay, let's get into this story. So Paul and over at hornfrogblitz.com dropped this in the thread about the big show that I posted over there, so people could go and listen to the podcast over there. And if you're a subscriber at Horn Frog Blitz, just know I'm putting this show on the channel, or I'm putting this show on the board. Jeremy posts all his shows on the board. Like all of the content that we create outside of Horn Frog Blitz ends up on Horn Frog Blitz in some form or fashion. And so in that thread, Paul asked if I had seen this video that we're about to watch, and I hadn't. And it's an interview of a Tennessee student telling people why she's not going to the Tennessee-Georgia game that was in Knoxville this past weekend. Fantastic game. Georgia ended up winning in overtime. Tennessee had a chance to win it at the end of regulation and missed a field goal. Electric game. But she wasn't there, and this is why. So we're going to pull up this video really quick. I'm going to turn that off so we can see it. Here we go. Let's all listen together.
We going to the game?
I am not. I did not have enough T credits.
How does it work?
So you get T credits by going to other sporting events and staying a certain amount of time, and we don't go to those.
How do you track the time?
They have like your geolocation on your phone. So like you check in and it gives you a point if you're there long enough.
Tennessee is also Russia when it comes to ticketing.
Yes.
Wow.
Interesting. Okay. So, Tennessee students get T credits when they attend non football sporting events if they stay for a long enough amount of time, and they can use those T credits to get into Tennessee football games. A couple things about this. First of all, on the surface at level, this is a really smart way for the university to ensure that its student body is supporting as many other athletic programs as possible just with their attendance. That's great, right? Hey, the women's basketball team is struggling this year, which is not normally a problem at Tennessee. It's fine. They're going to have students show up anyways because those students want the T credits. They have to stay for a certain amount of time in order to get the credits, and then they can go to the football game. That all makes sense. Tennessee's got a student body of like 40,000 people. So if you want to get into a football game, you're going to go to those other athletic events and you're going to rack up as many T credits as possible because I think they use those as priority points essentially to give you access to the student section and then better spots in the student section, so on and so forth, right? So if you're accumulating a ton of T credits, you're going to be in the heart of that Tennessee student section when it is rocking. And that's awesome. So on the surface, I love this idea, and I think it's going to. I think, for a large state school like Tennessee, it's really smart. Questionable on how they're executing this idea, because of the way that a student is being GPS tracked on their phone to know that they've been in the stadium long enough to earn those credits. You couldn't associate this with a student ID instead, like there's student IDs that have like RFID chips in them now. Like you can just scan your ID, get into the game, and it would serve the same purpose, unless they were afraid that you're gonna like hand your ID off to someone and one person's gonna go bite the bullet for like 11 different people. But come on. So that's a little bit interesting that they're just tracking these kids on their phones. And who's to say that that's the only way they're tracking these kids on their phones, right? Like, are they gonna start ensuring that every single kid is in every single class with the same GPS location stuff? Like a professor will just be able to pull up and be like, oh yeah, no, little Timmy's not in my class today because he's asleep in the alley behind the bar. And now I'm going to fail him for that. Like where that's the part that I hesitate on with this story is where's the line drawn? Where's the, you know, where's the university kind of stopping with this GPS geolocating stuff? On the surface, though, I think it's a great idea. It would be cool if they could associate that with your student ID because you need that wherever you go, anyways. So just figure out a way to make it connect to that, not your cell phone. Next, maybe it's just like hey, they scanned in and they have to scan out to get the T card, to get the T credit, right? You scan back out and it's like, okay, they were there for 30 minutes, they get a credit. They were there for an hour, they were there for the whole game, they get 5 credits, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not the University of Tennessee, and it's not on me to troubleshoot their systems. But I do think it's weird that they're tracking their students on their phones in that way just to give them access to football games. And if they're doing that, are they doing other things? Just a general question that I have. At the end of the day, though, I don't think a strategy like this would work at TCU. And it's for the same reason. If you go way back in the Wayback Machine to an episode we did like this time last year, when the University of Tennessee put a 10% price hike on all of its tickets and called it an NIL tax and said, yeah, we're raising money for NIL through increased ticket costs. And it's like, you raise ticket prices every single year for a variety of other reasons, and you never put a label on it. Why are you putting a label on it now? And it's because they wanted you to know what you were paying for and what the price increase went to. And that plan at Tennessee probably raised them a couple $1,000,000, right? But that, for the same reason that that wouldn't work at TCU for the same reason that this phone tracking GPS other sports access thing wouldn't work at TCU. The student body's not big enough, and the fan base isn't big enough. You price hike tickets by like 10%, which I know that's a sore subject for TCU fans right now. it's not going to raise the same amount of money. I think I did the math. I think for Tennessee, it was going to raise like $2.5 million annual just based on the football stadium. And for TCU, it would raise like 400 grand, which is like basically cool. That's congratulations. You've got your middle linebacker now or whatever it is, you know? So the size of the population when it comes to TCU versus Tennessee, neither of these ideas would work. And I don't think that with a TCU student body the size that it is, although it is growing, right? It's almost 13,000 students now with undergrad and grad. It's a little over 11,000 with just undergrad. Like, you need everybody in the football stadium as it is. Like, you got to get those students in there. You shouldn't be putting obstacles in the way of letting students into your football stadium by saying, hey, you got to go watch men's basketball first, or hey, you got to go get down to the TCU soccer team first, or check out TCU baseball, or whatever it is. You don't need to be putting obstacles in the way of getting TCU students into the student section. Now, it was packed on Saturday night against Abilene Christian, and I have no doubt that every single home game this year, it will be full up because TCU students show up and show out. But the reality is, how many would drop off if you said, hey, you also got to go to like 11 basketball games this year? I think a lot of them would drop off. I do. And so TCU's in a different situation than Tennessee simply because of student body size. And also, I think, you know, when you're talking about a fan base, just generally the size of TCU, you shouldn't be putting obstacles in the way of getting getting butts in seats. That doesn't make much sense to me, frankly. You got to make it easier. You got to make it more appealing, more compelling. Some of the things Melissa and I talked about on the last episode about in-game entertainment and the free ice cream for young kids between the third and fourth quarter, like, that's what you need to be doing more of. Not telling students they got to go to other sporting events so that they can come watch football as well. And that ties in, by the way, to the number of home games that TCU wants every year, right? Like, if you think of it from a revenue perspective, 7 home games is way better than 5. Way better than 5. Unless nobody's showing up, right? So you got to get people to show up. It's all tied together, folks. It's all tied together. We're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to come back and spend a little bit of time talking about the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, why it's coming front and center today in the kind of circle of debate, and why Cody Campbell is so involved. We'll be right back. Let's talk about the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961 and why it's relevant today and who's trying to change it and why. Because this is, I think, inherently tied to a couple different things. First and foremost, NIL, revenue sharing, and just the way schools are funding athletics today. It's inherently tied to that. It's also loosely tied to realignment. A lot of reasons why schools are trying to level up their conference is because of the TV contracts that are associated with those conferences, right? Moving from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten for Oregon and Washington, USC and UCLA will be over time an increase in annual revenue from the TV contract of roughly $50 to $60 million. Makes a lot of sense why folks are going to try and get to the Big Ten or the SEC. They've got the two best and biggest TV contracts right now. So the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961 is at the center of all of this for a couple different reasons. But first, let's talk about what the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961 actually is. So way back when, as TV was becoming a thing and people were starting to watch games instead of go to games, the professional leagues, namely Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, and later the NHL, were trying to find a way to control what games were televised, when they were televised, where they were televised, because at that time, the TV audiences were still so small that it was seen as a direct competition to gate fees, gate charges, ticket prices, right? Pro sports wanted people to come to the games, not watch the games on TV. So, In 1961, the Sports Broadcasting Act created the foundation for how pro sports were allowed to sell their TV rights. Okay? It allowed them to sell their TV rights collectively as a package, as a league, rather than individual organizations like the Texas Rangers or the Chicago Blackhawks or the New York Knicks selling their broadcasting rights individually. So the leagues got an antitrust exemption, essentially saying we're going to limit competition legally in order to get the TV deal that we want for the league. Right. So we're not going to allow individual organizations within the league to go negotiate their own TV rights. Instead, we're going to do it on behalf of everyone and make it more equitable and make it fairer. But it's also going to be limiting in some ways. And that's why they needed the antitrust exemption. So it allowed leagues to sell their TV rights collectively as a package, and it allowed them to level the amount of revenue so that small market teams were still viable, and it balanced competition, all these other kinds of things. And so it was essentially a move for pro leagues to say, we want to make sure that our league is still viable, that there aren't favorites, and that small market teams can still thrive in a league like this. Otherwise, all we'd see today were teams in major cities. We wouldn't have like the Charlotte Hornets or the Nashville Predators or anything like that. We would only see teams in like the top 15, 20 markets in the country. So this grew and grew and grew as television grew, right? As more people had TVs in their homes, as leagues started to understand how they could manage ad sales in the middle of their products, how they could, expand their viewership, and over time, well, at the outset, leagues and organizations were more concerned about butts and seats. They quickly became more concerned with how many eyeballs, right? And we see that shift take place around the 80s and 90s. It grows a lot over time, but the 80s and 90s are where it really starts to boom. And so the NFL was one of the front runners in this, but we've seen all the other leagues do this now too. But they leveraged the Sports Broadcasting Act to sign national TV deals, which exploded the amount of money they were getting, which exploded the league, which allowed them to market, which exploded popularity, which allowed them to negotiate a new TV deal, and so on and so forth. So you see kind of the cycle there. But this never happened at the collegiate level. So the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961 only covers professional sports. And it only, and at the time it was written, it only covered the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, and the NHL. Okay. It was only a limited antitrust exemption for those four leagues. Now, it's expanded a little bit and changed a little bit since then to include some other leagues and this, that, and the other. But it does not include college football. College football already owned and controlled all of the TV rights. And they limited appearances, strictly limited appearances. There were schools like Ohio State and Oklahoma who were only getting one game on a year on TV because the NCAA was so concerned about getting butts and seats and making sure that their gates still made money, right? And so come 1984, there was a lawsuit, the NCAA versus the University of Oklahoma. It should be noted that the University of Georgia was also a part of this. They filed a lawsuit against the NCAA saying that this was an illegal restraint of trade, that they should be able to negotiate their own television contracts for themselves to make as much money as possible. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Oklahoma and Georgia. So the NCAA lost. The NCAA has been losing lawsuits for decades, folks. Decades. They're terrible when it comes to courtroom arguments. They are always trying to do things in a way that limit or restrict the ability of universities and now student athletes to make money. So the NCAA loses this lawsuit in 1984. The court said that schools and conferences would be able to control their own TV rights. And so this opened up the door for a couple different things. First of all, this is when we see conferences start cutting TV deals. But this also opened up the opportunity for schools to do a lot of their own third-party media rights. This is how things like the Longhorn Network were eventually allowed to come into place, right? Obviously, that doesn't happen for decades after this ruling, but this ruling ultimately led to the University of Texas being able to do that. It's why other schools can stream stuff on their own website, right? This lawsuit was kind of the trigger for all of what we see now. And so, yes, conferences and universities had much more control over their TV contracts and much more control over the amount of money they were able to make. But it also severely fragmented the college sports media landscape. It broke it into a billion different pieces, right? Which is why today, when you're trying to watch football games, you can watch a couple on YouTube TV. Might have to switch over to the Big Ten Network if you don't get that package, or if you don't get, FS1, or if it might only be on ESPN Plus, so you got to go find it over there. God forbid it's on the CW, or it's on Paramount, or it's on Apple TV, or whatever it might be. Like, it's so hard sometimes to find where these games are. And part of that is because Oklahoma and Georgia sued back in the mid 80s and won against the NCAA. But the last part of this lawsuit is that it made it abundantly clear in 1984, it made it abundantly clear that college athletics were not protected by the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. There was no antitrust exemption for the NCAA. And that is why all of this fracturing happened. So while pro sports we've seen thrive under the SBA, the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, college sports have thrived, but in a fractured way and in an unbalanced way. That is why the Sports Broadcasting Act is coming back into play. It's because we're seeing the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, the Pac-12, the AAC, the Sun Belt, all sign their own different TV deals, media rights deals, and they're all completely unbalanced. The rich conferences get richer, smaller programs continue to struggle, and Olympic and women's sports are underfunded, especially at those schools that don't have the ultra-wealthy TV contracts. Fans face blackouts and paywalls, confusing streaming packages, all of that kind of stuff. So, why is that important today? Well, I just said, hey, when those 4 Pac-12 schools made the leap to the Big Ten, by the end of the current Big Ten TV contract, those schools are going to be making upwards of $50 or $60 million more per year, more than they would have had they stayed in the Pac-12. And so you can see where the financial imbalance is going to start creating more problems for college athletics. So, what's happening right now? Well, what's happening right now across college athletics typically involves Cody Campbell. He's involved on the Hill trying to negotiate for the SCORE Act. He's one of the reasons that the SCORE Act's not going to a vote right now is because he flipped a couple Republican Congress people to be against the SCORE Act. Because he doesn't like the fact that it gives an antitrust exemption to the NCAA, right? And we're going to come back to that in a second. But what he's also doing is he's pushing for an amended SBA, Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, to allow college sports to pool their rights nationally like the NFL does. So let's reset for a second here. On one hand, Cody Campbell is against a bill that is currently going through the legislative process because he does not like that it gives such strong antitrust exemptions to the NCAA. An antitrust exemption is what college sports needs to be able to nationally negotiate its media rights deal. The reason that Cody Campbell seems to be contradicting himself with two moves is because at the end of the day, he does not believe that the NCAA is the entity that deserves the antitrust exemption. He thinks it should be a different entity, one that doesn't exist yet. This is important. What he is doing is he is lobbying Congress to both fix the SCORE Act to take away the NCAA's power and amend the SBA to allow college sports to pool their national media rights. That would set the stage for a new entity to come in and control the media rights for all of college athletics. And it wouldn't be the NCAA. So why is this important? First of all, he doesn't trust the NCAA. That's not a shocker. Hardly anybody trusts the NCAA. Every time the NCAA gets a little bit of power, they tend to misuse it. They rule inconsistently on eligibility issues. They lose lawsuits left and right because they have no legal footing for trying to do a lot of the things they're trying to do, right? But Cody Campbell also understands something that's fundamentally true. At least I believe it as well. And that's, if this financial imbalance continues to be allowed to exist, we will see the death of a lot of Olympic sports at small schools and even larger schools across the country. We will see the death of a lot of women's programs all across the country. His theory, and it's a perfect world kind of theory, is that if every school, first of all, his theory is that if we pool all of the media rights of all of the colleges, let's just say for now, what could that look like? Could it just be the P2? Could it be the P4? Could it be everybody? We don't know yet. But let's just, for this example, say it was the P4. Cody Campbell believes that if the Power Four conferences, the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC, collectively negotiated a media rights deal, that they could double or probably triple the total value of all four of those existing contracts. That would mean that every school that's currently in those conferences would make like $100 million a year starting off out of their media rights deal, assuming that everybody got paid out the same. We're making a lot of assumptions here because this is, again, a perfect world theory. In that perfect world theory, Cody Campbell suggests that with that extra money, that would guarantee the protection of women's and Olympic sports programs all across college campuses, all across the country. And again, that's a very perfect world theory, because you could say the kind of the two biggest questions to that are, what guarantees would be put in place to A, ensure that every school is seeing the same cut from this new media rights deal, and what are the requirements for women's and Olympic sports spending? Because if you don't have those two things, here's what's going to happen to the perfect world theory. Blue blood schools are going to lobby for more of the contract than other schools, like we just saw in the ACC, right? Or they'll threaten to leave and just make it an even smaller group that breaks off and does its own thing. And if there's no protection in place for women's sports or Olympic sports, all that money is going to go to football and basketball. The bulk of that money is going to go to football and basketball, right? And remember what we talked about last episode on Indy Drill. The current 16-team protection, the 16-team requirement to be a D1 program, isn't as much of a protection as you think. The 16-team protection that's currently in the SCORE Act that's going through Congress isn't as much of a protection as you think. For instance, TCU has 19 programs. If they're only required to operate at 16 and one day they decide they need to get down to 16, nothing is stopping them from cutting 3 programs at TCU. Nothing. Not a single thing. And they'll save a butt ton of money doing it if they pick the right 3 programs. This is how it is. And so this idea for Cody Campbell, getting back to the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, is that there needs to be an amendment to the SBA that provides the same antitrust exemption to college sports as it does to the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, the NBA, and so on. But it can't be given to the NCAA because you can't trust them, which is why he's against the SCORE Act, because it gives the NCAA incredible antitrust powers, not just with media rights stuff, but also with player eligibility, player earnings. They would be able to overturn a lot of the lawsuits they've lost in recent years. So there's a lot going on here. There are a lot of threads. I hope I'm explaining this well. If I'm not, just let me know. So, at the end of the day, the big question is, would amending the SBA ultimately save college sports, specifically save women's and Olympic sports? Or would it just consolidate power in new hands in a new organization that wasn't the NCAA that would ultimately bring us to a similar result as if it was given to the NCAA, insofar as most of that money would go to the big schools and most of the money that goes to each of the schools would go to the revenue sports. So there's a lot that still needs to be worked out. I think that the move by Cody Campbell to start in this direction is a good one. I do. I just wonder if the kind of pie in the sky take on it is realistic. And what could a realistic iteration of this plan look like? I don't know. I'm not sure yet. That's a lot. I hope that y'all are still with me. Okay, we're going to take another quick break. Then we're going to talk about the ACC and its live look-ins. And then we're going to get to some picks. So the ACC is doing something incredibly cool on its broadcasts this year. It is the first conference in college sports to give you live look-ins to the review process in the middle of football games. The level of transparency is incredible. The reviews and the feedback from fans are fantastic. So what's happening is, during a review of a play in a football game, on TV and in your ears, fans can can hear real-time audio of the conversations between the command center where the review is taking place and the on-field officials. Huge. So you get transparency into the actual conversations that are being had between the command center and the refs. You get to see a timer of the review that shows command center personnel's perspective on the game action and how long the review is taking. All of this is stuff the command center can also see. It gives you insight into the decision-making process. You hear them talking through rules, talking through why the logic behind the decision, whether they're overturning or upholding something. It's beautiful. Oh my gosh, it's brilliant. And let me tell you, the Big 12 could absolutely use this, right? We just were talking last episode about the ref crew that got suspended. There were some miserably bad calls across the league in week 2 or in week 3, whatever week we just came out of. Holy cow. I would love to see other conferences adopt this. It's like the first good idea the ACC's had in 15 years, by the way. Shout out to them for figuring it out, because holy cow, they've made some bad decisions in the past. That's why they're being sued by half their league at one point. Anyways, I digress. The Big 12 needs this yesterday. The SEC and the Big 10 need this as well. Every fan base deserves to be able to hear the process behind these calls, because there are so many conspiracies right now about, oh, well, they needed this team to win so that they could get into the Big 12 championship game because we need 2 teams in the college football playoff to get the payout, and they're going to rig it so that the conference gets more money. And the SEC is doing this because they always want Bama to win, or they always want Ohio State to win in the Big 10. No, they really don't. These are just people doing a job. And a lot of times they don't want to do this job anymore because they're getting yelled at by everyone, and it sucks and they hate it, but they have to do it. Somebody has to do it, right? It's not a fun existence right now to be a ref. So I think transparency into the process would get a lot of people off their backs. It would be great for fan engagement. You get to see the process and you get to understand the process a little bit better. And maybe that would dissipate some of the conspiracy theories. It'll never get rid of them all because college football fans are psychopaths, but it would dissipate some of the conspiracy theories. At least I believe it would. Very, very cool stuff. Okay, we're not going to go back to a break because we just took a break, but we are going to get into our picks for the week. We got 5 games. Obviously, TCU SMU is the last one, but let's jump right in. We've got Utah -3 hosting Texas Tech. This is a 16 versus 17 matchup. It is on Fox at 11 a.m. Remember what I was talking about earlier about time slot and channel? Big Fox, big noon kickoff game, 11 a.m. It's not the time slot, it's the channel. Fox, huge audience going to be tuned in for this one. 2 teams that have big aspirations within the league and also within the college football playoff. I'm very excited for this football game. This will be both of these teams' first real test of the year. Utah boat raced UCLA earlier this season. We know how UCLA turned out because they've already fired their head coach. Texas Tech, I mean, East Texas A&M, Oregon State, and I can't even remember who else they played. Kent State, I think it was. My goodness. First real test for both these teams, and it's going to be in front of a huge audience. Big 12 refs, please do not blow this for us. Please do not blow this for us. I think the home environment for Utah is going to be the advantage here. They're only a 3-point favorite, which is basically home field advantage anyways. Vegas sees these teams as very level. I think the home field advantage ultimately puts Utah over the top. I think Utah wins this football game. Okay, next pick. Number 11, Oklahoma hosts number 22, Auburn, 2:30 on ABC. Oklahoma's almost a 7-point favorite. You can call that about a 3.5-point favorite on a neutral field. And I think we're going to get the real Jackson Arnold experience this week, the Oklahoma version of the Jackson Arnold experience. And guess who gets to inflict it on Auburn and its fan base? Brent Venables in Oklahoma. That defense is going to be geeked up to play Jackson Arnold. They're going to freak on him all day long. Worse than they did on Bryce Underwood in Michigan. I think Oklahoma covers by the 6.5. I think they clear that easily. And I think Auburn is unranked after this football game. 2:30 on ABC. Next. Number 19, Indiana, hosting number 9, Illinois. I didn't put the line on here for some reason because I'm very smart, but this is at 6:30 on NBC. Should be a fantastic game. These are 2 Big 10 teams that have college football playoff aspirations, and they're thinking, hey, we got to win this one because of the, this will be the kind of feather in the cap if we can make this come away with the win here. Let me scroll to where this game is. This is Indiana. The home team is a 4.5-point favorite despite being 19th and hosting the number 9 team in the country. So really interesting line here. Illinois' win over Duke looks great on paper because it was like 45-16, 45-13, something like that. But the reality is that it was a much closer football game than that. Indiana has just been kind of grinding really inferior teams into a fine powder through the first month of the season, and this is going to be their first real test. I don't know that 4.5 is even enough for Indiana in this one. I think it's going to be really close. I would not be shocked if Illinois came away with the road win here. I like Burt in this game. Brett Bielema. Give it to me, Burt. Next up, Baylor against Arizona State. I didn't put the spread on this one either, but that's okay. Baylor is a 2.5-point favorite at home against the Sun Devils. This is going to be a really interesting football game. I think this is the opportunity, just based on what I've seen from Baylor's defense in their games against Auburn and SMU. This is going to be an opportunity. If there was ever a game for Arizona State to figure it out in the post-Cam Scadaboo era, this is the weekend. You got to see something from Levitt. Got to see something from the receivers. Have to find some more consistency because there's no doubt about it. Baylor's going to score points. Their offense is really solid. Sawyer Robertson's great. Bryson Washington's fantastic. They got some bodies at wide receiver that can really go ball out. If Arizona State's offense can't keep up, we're going to learn pretty quick. Baylor's minus 2.5 in this game. I think they cover. I think they clear that 2.5 pretty easily. I think Arizona State is fraudulent, and we continue to see the Big 12 not have a back-to-back conference winner in 2025. Moving on to the Iron Skillet. TCU opened as a 6.5 point favorite. I've seen this jump to 7 in some places. I've seen this drop to like 5 in some places. Here's the thing. SMU is banged up. I think they're getting healthier. I think we're going to see some of the banged up guys try to give it a go on Saturday because it is the Skillet. It means a lot. It's supposed to be a pretty competitive game. I think TCU remembers last year. I think TCU remembers the embarrassment in Dallas last year because it was objectively an embarrassment. Everything that happened in that game. The sloppy play, the turnovers, the non-offensive touchdowns for SMU, Sonny getting tossed, all of it. Just embarrassing. And I think, even though they would never admit it, there's a little bit of a bitter taste in their mouths about that game. I think that's part of why they played sluggish against ACUs, because they're chomping at the bit for this one. Now, the goal will be not to make it a bigger deal than it is, because it's still just a non-conference game. You got the whole road ahead of you. As Kirk Sarlos likes to say for baseball, everything they want to achieve is still right out in front of them. So you can't build this thing up too much. But I get the sense that the team really wants this one. And when you're facing a banged up, not sure how banged up, SMU team that has a pretty porous secondary, and you've got a guy at quarterback who's making great decisions, a wide receiver core that can back it up, I like TCU, and I like TCU to cover in this one. Horned Frogs get it done on ESPN2 at 11 a.m. in the final battle for the Iron Skillet on the books, maybe for quite a while. That's going to do it for this episode of Frogs Insider Indy Drill edition. If you are watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Please comment Skillet. If you are listening on a podcast, please comment Skillet. If you have not yet left a rating or a review, if you have not yet liked or subscribed, please do that. Thank you very much in advance. You're great, and I love you. We will be back with a From the Other Sideline in a day or two. That is Melissa's Iron Skillet preview with someone who covers SMU. We will not be spoiling that guest on this show because I don't want to do that to my good friend Melissa, but it's going to be a banger. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a banger. You're going to really, really enjoy it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will be back for From the Other Sideline. You will see me, Melissa, Jeremy Clark, and Steven Johnson on the post-game show following the SMU game, and then we'll be back for the big show on Sunday. Until then, go Frogs.